Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ali Can Ayandar. 1 year ago, we saw powerful images of the Free Syrian Army hoisting its flag alongside Turkey's in the city of Afrin. Located in Syria's northwest and home to nearly 500,000 people, Afrin had been overrun by the YPG terror group after Assad's forces abandoned the city without a fight back in 2012. For 6 years, life in the region was one of constant fear. But since the YPG has been cleared, that fear has dissipated as daily life slowly returns to normal. James Kim explains.
After suffering years of uncertainty, Afrin is now seeing a clearer future. Its streets are bustling again with activity as people come out to shop in Rome. All this has been made possible by an improving security environment thanks largely to Operation Olive Branch, which Turkey launched in 2018. One of those benefiting is Bassem, who owns a shop in the heart of the city. He fled from the terror unleashed by the Assad regime on eastern Ghouta and escaped to Afrin shortly after it was liberated.
There wasn't much activity when I moved to Afrin. Jobs weren't available. Pretty much all the stores were closed. I waited a few months before I opened my shop. Now there's increased activity, growing jobs because the city is safer. The city has become more vibrant.
Local councils have been set up and security forces deployed. They've provided the conditions needed for Afrin's revival. Afrin was under the control of the YPG for 6 years. Turkey's cross-border military operation lasted for 2 months before Turkish-backed forces seized control of the city and declared victory over the YPG terror group. With the help of Turkey, 7 governing councils were established and power was handed over to locals. Saeed Suleiman is one of the council leaders and remembers much of what happened over the last year.
When Operation Olive Branch started, the YPG forced people from their homes. Roughly 300,000 people left their homes and relocated outside Afrin. We're doing our best to have them return home. Roughly half of them have returned. There's a big improvement in security.
A lot more has to be done for Afrin to fully recover, but it has fertile soil and it's well known for its olive trees. And Suleiman has plans for plenty of other strategies for growth.
The region's biggest improvement would be a university. Locals here love 2 things: their olive trees and education. Families here are poor. Despite that, they want to send their children to school. More importantly, this would help persuade those who left to come back home.
Turkey's aim is to strengthen regional administrations, but that can only happen when the region's security is guaranteed. And for that to happen, Turkey says the YPG needs to be cleared from its borders. James Kim, Straight Talk.
And to break this all down, joining me is Vehbi Baysan, who's an assistant professor at Ibn Khaldun University, and Ammar Kaf, who is the executive director at the Omran Center of Strategic Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. Good to have you on. Ammar, let me talk to you. We saw in the news piece by Yasin, Bassem and Suleiman's story is very inspiring. But is that the case for most people in Afrin? Is it stable? Is it secure?
Well, I mean, relatively speaking, it is more secure, obviously, but there remains some challenges for the local population. There is a huge internally displaced population that is still not integrated well into the local community that is predominantly Kurdish. But again, those are relative terms to stability in other, if you compare it to other regions, it has regained much of a stability, having half of the population returning, 150,000 building schools, 248 schools, the health centers, the 3 hospitals, serving over 1,000 people per day in the health centers. Those are services that are indicators of stability.
We're going to get back to some of the challenges in just a bit, but I want to get Vehbi in the conversation. This is Turkey's sort of second cross-border operation after Operation Euphrates Shield. If you were to compare and contrast both of them, why did Turkey feel the need to actually launch a second cross-border operation?
Well, actually, at the moment, the news obviously focusing over the Kurdish areas and the Turks, Kurdish offensive, etc. I don't think this represents the reality. The reality is that Turkey feels that there is a serious threat to their national security. I mean, if anybody's border, if you deploy 60,000 armed men, financed and trained by the U.S. in, just for them to fight against Daesh, that constitutes serious threat. So Turkey, with this follow-up operation, actually got control of Afrin and then moved away YPG. But it was equally important to have locals actually taking the matters in hand. And therefore, they made sure that they're establishing local councils with the Turkish help. And also, for example, in terms of reestablishing restructuring the health services, our Minister of Health here, had the backup there. And also they opened up some industrial zones. They're just trying to create a safety zone in which actually the locals would hopefully continue their normal life.
Ammar, every time I go into Syria, the first place that I visit into every Syrian town that I go into is the local majlis. These are critical for sort of the runnings of the city. Have these been set up? Are Syrians returning back to places like Afrin now that it's been cleared?
I mean, over 150,000 of the original residents of Afrin have returned, which is roughly half. And this is the estimates of the local council that is headed by a local Kurdish businessman, Mr. Suleiman. And yes, the establishment is a great success, although perhaps the next phase would be electing those councils. The establishment in the stabilization phase is important and was established correctly. Those councils are in charge of regaining ownership and trust of the local population, assuring local populations of security, and that's why with the help of the Turkish authorities, training over 2,100 police just in the city of Afrin, let alone the 6 localities around Afrin.
Vipin, the reality is that even though the YPG may have been sort of repelled from the region of Afrin, there's still a presence in northern Syria. We know that they're a strong ally of the U.S. forces, which up until now, we don't know if they're going to leave in their total of 2,000, that they're going to have a presence. Turkey will have to come face to face either with the YPG or its political arm, the PYD, sometime in the future. Yeah. What is this likely going to be like?
Well, Turkey seems, yes, they're determined. I mean, look, the national security is very important. It's vital. Our police, our army, we're got to assure that. So that's a reality. And it seems that Turkey is so far really avoiding a direct clash with YPG and their political wings. They keep telling the international community that actually this is a threat. There are armed men there, and after the fight over Daesh, as we saw, like they're clearing out the area, especially the northeastern part of Syria. These the weapons distributed there will remain there, and that constitutes serious threat. So Turkey, from that end, when it looks at, of course, the international community somehow receives it as this is the fight against YPG. Yes, indeed, because these are the armed guys, but this is never an operation against Kurds. Afrin is predominantly Kurdish area. There are also pockets of etc., but Kurdish villages, etc. But also there are Arabs there. There are Turkmens. There are extended families. I used to travel there extensively and used to meet them. They still speak Turkish. So safety and security is the priority.
I think watching media, especially Western media, especially U.S. media, Turkey has had difficulty in explaining this point that you just made.
Absolutely. That's why I emphasize this. Sorry, Ammar. Yes.
I mean, it's unfair to characterize Turks, to paint them with a broad brush, that all Kurds. Yes. What can Turkey do more to actually say, look, we're after the terrorists, not the local people? What can be done?
Well, I think number one is to control the local Syrian, Free Syrian Army members that have actually painted, unfortunately, a negative image of the Turkish objectives. And so Turkey has done a lot. I mean, a lot of the practices may be isolated, but it's been systematic in a way that have been out of control. And this is not to blame Turkey in any way. Those are the actions of those factions. But so one of the solutions could be to demilitarize this zone, meaning to ask all factions to leave those areas, especially that we have now trained police officers for the local councils that are in close coordination with the Turkish authorities also.
Doesn't that bear the risk of actually turning into an Idlib where it's been sort of characterized as a de-escalation zone and we're actually seeing sort of external, whether it's the regime or Russian forces, actually slowly exert their force into that area. Doesn't Afrin sort of bear a similar risk?
I think the international, the talks between Russia and Turkey have been solid in terms of Afrin being set aside and being part of the national security of Turkey. And so I don't think it bears the same level of discussions as Idlib in that sense.
Okay, Vipin, let me ask you, what do you think the roadmap for Afrin is? What role will Turkey be playing? What role will Russia be playing in the coming months?
Well, actually, Turkey trying to be really play a constructive role there. This is very important. I know that in some international media, Turkey was blamed as occupying the land and they want to just change Syrian borders. That's not going to happen. And Turkey's intentions are different. But Turkey needs stability and safety at its borders. We have around 850 kilometers border with Syria, and actually regime cannot protect it, Russians cannot protect it, and Turkey does not want to face in the near future any kind of this sort of terror, because the problem is that these weapons will remain in the region. US will never take them back. We saw this in Libya. Now we have an internal domestic war going on there. So Turkey determined not to allow this. So it's just for safety of Syrian citizens mainly.
Baysan, Amarkaf, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I appreciate your insight and your analysis.
Thank you.
On March 31st, 57 million eligible voters in Turkey will have a choice to make, whether to stay on the course they are currently on or turn in a radical new direction. They'll be choosing from an array of candidates to run crucial mayorships in the country's biggest cities. With countless tight races and some previously secure strongholds now up for grabs, it's hard to say what the outcome will be. But one thing is clear, a generational change could slowly be emerging. For most of these young voters, the AK Party and Recep Tayyip Erdogan are the only party and leader they have ever known. But this generational standard-bearer could be facing one of its toughest tests on March the 31st. For the second time in 9 months, Turkish voters will be heading to the polls. It follows 2 landmark votes where President Erdogan was re-elected last year, assuming largely expanded executive powers that were narrowly approved in a 2017 referendum. Since then, the country has been trying to steer a steady course through turbulent waters, both with the economy and shifting allegiances in its foreign policy. Both are issues voters are paying close attention to. And as in the last general elections, cross-party alliances have been forged to broaden the appeal. The ruling AK Party has once again joined forces with the Nationalist Movement Party, or MHP, under the People's Alliance umbrella. On the other side is the Nations Alliance, comprising of the main opposition, CHP, and the E Party. The most watched battleground will be Turkey's largest province, and the People's Alliance's candidate is no stranger to Turkish politics. Binali Yıldırım served as the country's last prime minister and more recently as Speaker of Parliament.
Istanbul is a passion for us. Istanbul is a love story for us.
He'll be running against Ekrem İmamoğlu from the Nations Alliance.
Yeni bir dönem başlatıyoruz 1 Nisan'da.
We start a new era on April 1st. We will find quick solutions for poverty.
Şimdi ucuzlatacağız.
The ruling AK Party and its political predecessors have been on top of Istanbul politics for the past quarter century. But Istanbul narrowly voted against President Erdogan's constitutional reforms in the 2017 referendum. Another hotly contested province will be Ankara. And just like Istanbul, the Turkish capital has been led by Turkey's conservative movement ever since they swooped onto the political scene in 1994. But the longtime incumbent is not running this time. Instead, the AK Party has put forth the current Minister of Environment and Urban Planning, Mehmet Özhaseki, to represent the People's Alliance. After losing in the last 2 elections, Mansur Yavaş has once again thrown his hat into the race. This time, he'll be on the Nations Alliance ticket and hoping that a third time is the charm. Should the AK Party lose Ankara, it would mean an end to their 25-year grip on capital politics. The rule of thumb in Turkey has always been vote for party in general elections and vote for candidate in local elections. And looking at the big names in the races, it seems this mantra is holding true. While the results of these elections aren't likely to have major ramifications, losing either Istanbul or Ankara could be a major setback for the AK Party, whose rise to the top of Turkish politics was spawned by these type of local elections. So the question is, which provinces will want to continue with President Erdogan's leadership, and which ones will vote for change? And joining me now is Hakan Akbaş, who is a senior advisor at the Albright Stonebridge Group, and Barçın Yinaç, who is a journalist at the Hürriyet Daily News. Welcome to both of you. Let's talk money, let's talk politics. Barçın, I want to start with you. I want to get your understanding of the philosophy, political philosophy, especially in these election times of the AK Party. What does it say when a party like the AK Party puts Binali Yıldırım, a former prime minister, a former speaker of parliament, as a candidate for mayor for Turkey's most important province?
Well, it could tell us two things. The first thing is that maybe the governing party feels a little bit insecure in Istanbul. And that's only natural, I would find, because it's, AK Party has had tremendous success at the polls, nearly unmatched in the world. And usually parties staying so long in power, they tend to lose their votes. However, they don't want to risk it. Istanbul is very special for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So on the one hand, it can represent a feeling of insecurity. On the other hand, however, there is a systemic change in Turkey. It's a presidential system. The country is governed by the presidential system, and Binali Yıldırım is accepted as a rather successful transportation minister, a rather successful prime minister, and therefore the president wants to give the message to the residents of Istanbul that I'm bringing you over a name that has governed the country. Istanbul is so important for me that I'm bringing you a name which I have confided to govern the country. And a third maybe underlying message there is that, and the president keeps underlining that as well, he would want to give the message that there will be harmonious work between the mayor and the central government. And he wants to say that, well, I am in Ankara, and whenever the mayor will have to ask for something from Ankara, I will be there and we will have a harmonious working relationship.
Okay, Hakan Akbaş, let's get you in the conversation. Strictly looking at the numbers, Turkey is on the brink of a recession. We're going to find out in the next couple of months. The economy is at the top of voters' minds. How much will this weigh into the mindset and the decision-making process of the 57 million voters out there?
Look, it's always about the economy. Whether the polls are at the local level or the central level, that's the case. And yes, Turkey experienced in the fourth quarter of last year in a negative growth area. But if you look at the macro picture of what happened last year, especially in the second half, that had largely to do with the spot that Turkey had with U.S. and the crisis in August following the Pastor Brunson crisis. So, and on top of it, obviously, we had the Fed starting to tighten up, which basically started ringing the alarm bells for all the emerging markets, including Turkey. So, and on top of it, Turkey launched a new program to start rebalancing the economy away from domestic growth towards more exports and value-added manufacturing. And obviously, that is just in the beginning, and we have more ways to go. But I don't think, because this is the local elections, it will have some role, but I don't think it's going to be as material of an impact as that would have been in the general elections.
Okay, assuming that it's going to have an impact, my question to both of you, if it's all about the economy, Turkey has seen economic hardships in the past before. Why hasn't the opposition been able to capitalize on this then? Hakan?
Well, that is a great question to ask to the leaders of the opposition party. Even in this current sort of campaign season, it is very clear to see that really AK Party is sort of a campaigning, on its own, because as I look at the opposition parties, I'm not sure if they are in their best competition sort of forms. So from that perspective, I would say that in a way this would be against sort of asking for a mandate for the next 4 years, where we will not have a period of we will not have any elections coming up. So therefore, after these elections are over, then I think the government will be in a position to look for more bold reforms and look for ways to sort of stabilize the economy and put it back to growth.
Parchin, Hakan mentioned that the opposition was not at its top form. Why is it that the opposition can't seem to break that sort of proverbial glass ceiling? They're always stuck in this 20 to 30% range. I mean, is it because the Turkish voters are inherently sort of center-right than center-left? They have an inherent advantage there. Why can't they break that 30% ceiling?
Well, I think the opposition is in a constant state of soul-searching, especially in terms of the left-wing ideologies. This is something I think we also witness in Europe as well. The opposition, especially Republican People's Party, try to unite different tendencies, political tendencies, but at the end of the day, these different tendencies sometimes doesn't match. They don't come in a harmonious way. That is to say, they want to sort of unite all those who are not happy from the AKP, right? But all those who are not happy from the AKP do not share the same ideology. And in terms of the voters, I think, the voters, when they look to the opposition, they don't see an efficient leadership. They don't see vision. They sort of say, even if I'm not happy with the existing governing alliance, I look to the side and I'm not sure they would fare better, So it then becomes sort of a preference between the lesser of the sort of devil, in a metaphoric way.
But it's interesting that actually they have to go sort of search across on the other side of the political spectrum for this soul searching, and that sort of brings in the question of how viable is that sort of alliance with the E Party. All right, my last question to both of you is going to be political fatigue. Why hasn't the AK Party sort of had its case of political fatigue, and voters as well? And let's start with the markets with you. This is it's been going on since 2002, and this is a phenomenal case. And
exactly,
Barcha was actually referring to it being sort of like record-breaking in terms that as well.
Look, AK Party has been in power since 2002, and obviously, given the last sort of elections to change the country's political system into executive presidency, I think that's creates the opportunity after these elections, these local elections, to basically refresh the leadership at the cabinet level, refresh the value proposition of Turkey to foreign investors, to business community, to also perhaps look at the foreign policy vis-a-vis the US, the EU, as well as even the East, including China and Asian countries. So I think that if there's one thing that I want to give credit to the incumbent party is that they've managed to reform themselves periodically. And I think even President Erdogan had acknowledged that several times. And I think that we will start seeing this, over the next 4 years, where hopefully we will not have new polls.
Barcha, I have about a minute left. I want to get the last word to you. In terms of political fatigue, how has the party been able to sort of get over this?
They work a lot as well. They're very much organized, and one has to give credit to President Erdogan as well. I mean, he spends a lot of time. He doesn't. The problem is he doesn't show himself the fatigue. But I think the governing elites needs to be careful reading the election results, because there is fatigue still among the population. And we have to watch the figures in terms of the participation level, in terms of where the votes have gone. And so it will be very, very important to have a very healthy analysis of the result that will come out.
March 31st, that's when it'll all begin. Hakan Akbaş, thank you very much for coming on to Straight Talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Can Ayanar. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter, the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.